Ladies and gentlemen, meet Eveline Cronin and Olivier Chartier. They both work for the research and consultancy company Ecoris, established, among other places, here in Brussels, a company with some 500 staff, working mostly for the public sector. Eveline and Olivier have helped us enormously in evaluating the answers to the consultation on modernizing and simplifying the common agricultural policy. They will now present an analysis of the answers to the online questionnaire of the consultation, an analysis that you will certainly find very, very interesting. It is in this item of our agenda where we will use Slido for the first time for a small poll. So please get ready to use it, and the rest I leave gladly to Eveline and Olivier. Thank you.
We're indeed very pleased to share with you today the main results of the open public consultation, modernizing and simplifying the CAP. Before we start, we should have here the first question to test the Slido application. It's very simple. Did you or did you not participate to the open public consultation? The public consultation organized by DG Agriculture has been a great success in terms of participation. We realize this especially if we look back in time. 7 years ago, in July 2010, I was in this room attending a conference and public debate on the CAP after 2013. At that time, a consultation was organized as well, and 5,700 contributions were received. This year, the consultation raised much higher attention. And as a result of this success in attracting participation, well, the preparation of this summary has been a real challenge for us, but it also makes the analysis and the results very interesting and informative. During this session, we will say a few words about the open public consultation in introduction. We will then describe the profile of the different participants before providing you with a summary of some of the something or? Okay. So we will not give all the results to all the questions, but later today, Peter mentioned the presentation will be available online, will be published. Our report with the detailed analysis of the answers to all of the 33 questions you will find in this report. A few words on the consultation. It was open for 3 months, ended in the 2nd of May. It consisted of an online questionnaire available in all EU languages, 28 closed questions and 5 open questions. The main characteristic of an open public consultation is the difference it has with a survey. When you do a survey, you control who is in your sample to ensure representativity. For example, if you want to implement an EU survey, you will make sure you have a representative sample in each of the member states so that you can conclude and make an analysis at member state level and then conclude at EU level. This is not the case in open public consultation. As you will see, there are important differences in level of participation between countries. So this is actually the main limitation of an open public consultation. We cannot conclude that EU citizens think A or B. We can only conclude that the participants to the consultation think A or B. This doesn't mean that the results are not interesting. They are actually very informative. And they become very informative when you have a high number of participants and when you analyze differences between different groups. This is what we have done, and to do that, we did not create our own methodology. We have followed the indications from the Better Regulation Guideline. In this guideline, the first step that is recommended is to identify duplicates and also identify campaigns. A campaign is a coordinated set of replies that can overwhelm the response from individual stakeholders. So for these reasons, the Better Regulation Guideline recommends to identify the campaigns and analyze them separately. So during the first 2 weeks of our work, we've been identifying these campaigns. There's been a very large one, pan-European campaign, organized by a coalition of NGOs called Living Land, which attracted a lot of participants. In this campaign, there has been suggested answers to the 5 open questions. There's been a number of national campaigns as well. So after this work, using this methodology, you see here that we had in total 322,000 replies to the open consultation. The response generated by the Living Land campaign were about 259,000 after removal of duplicates, after removal of answers from other national campaigns. We end up with a total number of answers that has been used for our analysis of 58,520 replies. So before we go into the details of the profile of these respondents, we'll ask my colleague Evelyn to give a little bit more information on these campaigns.
Thank you very much, Olivier, and good morning to all of you. As Olivier explained, there was a very large public campaign that had an overwhelming success, which is the Living Land campaign. And we would like to present to you first where the responses that contributed to this campaign come from. In this first map, you can see that these were the questions to the responses only on the open questions. So to the 5 open questions, the Living Land Coalition made it very easy. You could fill in a form and submit it, thus rendering answers to 5 open questions. As you can see, these represent slightly less than 260,000 answers, of which over 100,000 came from Germany, but it was also very successful in Italy, France, Spain, and Belgium, where there were over 10,000 respondents. When we then went more into the details of the answers, we also saw that people took care and followed the guidelines that the Living Land Coalition drafted, which also included answers to the closed questions. When doing the analysis on strings of text and answers to the 5 open questions together, we further identified another slightly more than 2,000 answers, of which again more than 1,000 came from Germany and more than 100 from Spain. Also other EU member states were covered by this. As this was such a large success, we would like to present to you the answers that the campaign gave to the 5 open questions, which were these. I'll present to you a couple. We're bound by time constraints, but I'll give you the most important points. As main issues and problems and obstacles to the CAP achieving its objectives, this campaign considered that the fact that it does not promote sustainable agriculture and it benefits only a small number of large farms as a big issue. In the modernized CAP, they considered then, very consistently, that the objectives should be the supporting of the transformation to a more sustainable model of agriculture and to protect the environment. In ideas for simplifying the CAP, they consider that a targeted and measurable environmental requirements should be linked to subsidies under the first pillar. This was not the only public campaign out there. We identified around 30 more based upon answers to open questions. As you can see, almost the entire EU is covered, so people from all nationalities participated in this, and they come from all different types of sectors and backgrounds. So there were coordinated responses coming from farmers' associations, but as well from other environmental organizations, animal protection organizations, provinces, and chambers of agriculture. Of course, there were also people that gave their individual replies or used these campaigns but tweaked them to their own personal views. And for that, Olivier will take over again and tell you who answered.
So we're going back to the 58,520 respondents. 84% of the respondents indicated to have completed the questionnaire as an individual. 21,000 in their capacity involved in farming. As you see here, mostly involved in family farms, and 27,000 of respondents as individual as other citizens. So pay attention to the pictogram that are here, because we're going to use them throughout our presentation to present the results. The third category that is identified and used for the analysis is organization. You have the pictogram here. So respondents who answered in their professional capacity or on behalf of an organization for 15% of the total. Among these, you see here in the chart, a large majority were private company, a large majority as well involved in agriculture and forestry. This slide here shows you the overall results of the sample. What we have done is that we have added farmers who could have answered in their professional capacity if they have replied as an organization involved in the farming sector with less than 10 employees. Where do the answers come from? Well, to a large extent from Germany, with 32,000 out of the 58,000, but the good news is that there have been answers in each of the 28 member states.
So now for what you're here for, the summary of the results to the public consultations. What did the participants say? Just a small reminder, repetition, repetition, repetition. These are the three categories over which we compared the results to each of the questions. So we have our farmer with a barn, which is the individual involved in farming, and the private micro-enterprises that are working in the agricultural or forestry sector. Then we have the other citizens, which is the small man or woman in pants standing there, and the organizations. So let's look at what the participants thought about agriculture, rural areas, and the CAP today. And we'll set the scene. In the first two questions, you were asked to identify the most important challenges the agricultural sector has today. And in the second questions, you were asked whether there are CAP tools that are well suited to deal with these challenges. It was nice to see that amongst the most prominent answers, the challenges identified and the tools identified actually corroborated quite well. So we have linked them in order to tell you a story. The most important challenge identified as a first stage was a fair standard of living for farmers. A tool considered well suited for a challenge like this was income support, covering coupled and decoupled premiums. As you can see, we're mostly the farmers that considered this important. The second important challenges were pressures on the environment and climate change. The CAP tool best suited was rural development support on environment and climate action. Here, however, we saw that this was very important to the other citizens participating to this consultation. As you can see, over 55% of their answers ticked this box. And for the rural development support, this was 1/3 of their answers. The last one was the lack of jobs and growth as a challenge to the agricultural sector in the EU. Considering that, the rural development support for investments in physical and human capital was seen as important as well. Here, answers were more balanced across the different groups. However, the other citizens do not consider it one of the most important challenges amongst the others, only 7%. So to wrap up, the other citizens really put the emphasis on pressures on the environment and climate change, while our group of farmers participating to this consultation considered it to be the fair standard of living. The majority of the stakeholders that participated agreed, however, that the challenges are only addressed by the CAP to some extent. But the citizens that were not involved in farming had a more negative view on this than those involved in farming.
Next, results on the obstacle to the farming sector. So two replies here, two sets of questions. First question, participants were asked if they agree or disagree with different statements. So 3 statements here. First one, 97% of all respondents agree that farmers get a limited share of price consumer pay. No disagreement between other citizens or farmers. Consensus on that. 88% agree that farm incomes is still significantly lower than average EU income. And 87% agree that EU farmers face stricter requirements than non-EU farmers. Second question on this slide is related to the main barrier for becoming a farmer. Respondents were asked to select 4 barriers out of 11 options. We show them here. The first barrier identified by the respondent is related to land, lack of land, price of land. The second one is related to the low profitability of the sector. The third one, administrative requirements. And the fourth one, the image of the sector. Next result is about the contribution of farmers to our society. In these questions, respondents were asked to select 3 out of 8 options, and we show here the 5 options that have been most frequently selected. So you see here, ensuring that enough food is available, supplying healthy, safe, and diversified food, protecting the environment, economic activity and employment in rural areas, and ensuring the health and welfare of farm animals were the 5 main contributions selected by the respondents. You see below differences between categories. For the farmers, the first contribution is the supplying of healthy, safe, and diversified food. For other citizens, the first contribution selected is the protection of the environment. Another important difference is the importance for other citizens, with the 20% in purple for animal welfare, and for organizations on the right, the orange, 22% for the economic activity and employment in rural areas. So different views between different categories of stakeholders for this question. The next slide is very important. It concerns the environmental challenges faced by agriculture and how the CAP perform. So in this question, 4 main challenges, and there's no differences between categories. So the views of other citizens, views of farmers were the same. No divergence for this one. First challenge identified is the protection of biodiversity. The second one, the reduction of soil degradation. The third one, a more sustainable use of pesticide and fertilizer. And the last one, the fourth one, preservation of genetic diversity. The next question was very simple. Is the CAP addressing this challenge successfully or not? The answer is here, and the answer, it's clear, it's no. And the answer is no for all participants, but to a greater extent for other citizens with 80%.
All right. Ooh. There were also open questions, which we tried to summarize to the best extent possible. We tried to give you a flavor of the discussion that we saw going on between the participants in this public consultation. And the first one was on the main problems and obstacles the CAP faces in order to reach its objectives and their drivers. So here we have the first problem that pops out from this word cloud is environmental pollution and related issues. Environmental pollution refers to the pollution of air, water, and soil. This links to the views of the participants that there is a lack of attention to sustainability and a lack of consideration of sustainable use of pesticides, fertilizer, and herbicides. A second point is that of bureaucracy and complexity. There is a large amount of documents that need to be provided under this policy, and there is, according to our participants, a lack of practical knowledge at different levels. A last point here was the view or the perception of the influence that large industry and lobby groups have on the policy. The second question then was, what do you consider to be the most burdensome elements of the CAP? And maybe all of you can keep one element in mind, and then you can check whether this is what you expected. Is it? So what pops out here was the greening. It's considered to be quite complex. The timing of deadlines is, according to the responses, sometimes off. The amount of administrative burden that this element generates is considered to be a concern in relation to the impacts that are seen on the ground, according to the participants. A second burdensome element is the application for subsidies, grants, or any kind of premium, which is considered to change quite often, complex to fill in. And there are different views amongst participants whether the use of IT systems would improve it or would rather make it even more complex than it already is. The large part then also relates to that, which is on documentation and the accuracy of the information that is required. This is considered to be very high and often very detailed, maybe even a little bit too detailed, which is also something we did. There is a lot of too many and too much in your answers. Then we looked at objectives and the governance of the CAP. Which should be the objectives? So the CAP and its objectives. Firstly, the consultation asked, what do you consider to be amongst the 10 Juncker priorities the CAP should do more on? Very little surprises. There was boosting investment growth and employment, mitigating and adapting climate change, and strengthening the EU single market. Very consistent with other answers in the consultation. And all stakeholders agreed on these three main priorities. When they were asked which are then the most important objectives to the CAP, there were very differing views. For farmers, this is viable food production, and for citizens, the emphasis was more on environment and climate. Let's look into detail. Under viable food production, it was mostly ensuring a fair standard of living that is considered to be an objective worth taking into account. For citizens, the answers were spread between the supply of products, mostly on encouraging the supply of healthy and good quality products, and considerations for the environment and climate, as in contributing to a high level of environmental protection across the EU. On the rural areas, all three categories that we considered agreed that this is an important objective to take into account. Any new objectives we should include in the CAP? An open question. Let's have a look. There were different subjects touched upon here. We see the environment and climate coming back under soil and water, but also considerations for the market stability, how the market works, market access came up in the answers, and the consideration for employment, job opportunities in rural areas and in the agricultural sector. Also, organic farming came back here, and the consideration of animal welfare and the quality of products.
Okay, so we've seen the objectives. So the next logical question is at which level these objectives should be addressed. So very simple question, respondents could select EU level, national level, or regional level. So we see here, for the objectives related to market uncertainty, healthy and quality products, and the objectives on environment and climate change, large majority of the respondents decided for the EU level. We don't present per category because there's no important differences between farmers and other citizens for these aspects. For some other objectives, it's a bit more mixed. Fair standard of living, 43%, EU level, 42%, national level, ensuring reasonable prices bit the same, and for the last one, rural area, where we see here that regional level increase. But important findings here, important observation from the consultation is that there's a consensus as well between the different categories of respondents. Do we need a common policy? Do we need a common agricultural policy? So that was the next question. And here, respondents were asked to indicate if they agree or disagree, if we need a common policy to address different issues. So the answer is clear. Yes for the single market. Yes for objectives related to cross-border challenges. And yes for a common framework for sharing best practices. The results are a bit more mixed when it comes to having common budget because it's more efficient. But as you see here, no major difference neither between the different categories of stakeholders. We move to the next section of the questionnaire and of the analysis that concerns agriculture, rural area, and the CAP tomorrow. Consideration for the future CAP. This question, respondents were asked to agree or disagree with different statements. Here are the 3 statements we selected for this presentation. Farmer needs direct income support. Improving farmers' position in value chain as an important objective for the future. And agri-policy should deliver more benefits for environment and climate. So let's look at the answers from the respondents per category. So green means agreement. That means important consideration for the future. So large majority for farmers, for the first statement that farmers need direct income support, although also for organization. For the second statement, improving farmers' position value chain, common views between different stakeholders. A large majority, 96%, consider it an important element. And for the last one, agri-policy should deliver more for environment, a majority for farmers and a larger majority for other citizens. We enter a bit more into details now. We look at the criteria for allocating direct payment. So 5 criteria among 10 options. So these are the 5 criteria that have been most frequently selected by the respondent. On the left, area under national constraint, capping, environmental and climate benefit, support to young farmers, and small producers. There's some differences between the categories. We see that other citizens give more importance to environment in the middle and to small producers on the right. And for farmers, area under national constraint, capping, and young farmers were the most frequently selected criteria for allocating direct payments in the future. Next results, what are the CAP objectives, future CAP objectives? What should be the objectives for environmental protection and for climate change? The same principle, respondents were asked to select among 7 options. We show here the 3 main options. So the first one is sustainable use of water. The second one, prevention and reduction of soil erosion. And the third one, prevention and biodiversity of losses. And as you see in this chart, there's no major differences neither between different categories of respondents. For climate change, the objectives most frequently selected concern the reduction of greenhouse gas emission, carbon storage and sequestration. The second one, climate change adaptation and diversification of farm. And the third one, renewable energy sources, with some differences between categories of respondents, but more or less no significant differences.
So now that we know the objectives, what should the CAP then encourage? If we consider young farmers and young rural entrepreneurs, we could see that, especially for the farmers, the incentivization of the transfer of farms is of importance, but also the support of business startup. We found a very similar structure of answers among the organizations. Other citizens' answers put more emphasis on the soft measures, as in supporting transfer of knowledge and supporting new forms of cooperation. How can the CAP encourage innovation? Our three categories agreed here. We should look at the support we could give to farmers to participate in innovative projects, to support their knowledge chains, and to improve the competence and the impartiality of advisory services. Furthermore, those involved in farming stressed that there is a need to better access financing and investment opportunities. Let's wrap it up. How can we modernize and simplify the CAP? The respondents were asked whether a CAP would be simpler if, and all of them mostly agreed. Around 70% agreed that there could be a reduction of overlaps between rural development and other CAP measures, which would make it simpler. Around 60% said more extensive use of e-government services, better use of databases and technologies to reduce farm inspections and controls. Commissioner Hogan also stressed that earlier in his speech. 70% agree on more choices to farmers when it comes to environmental measures, would make it simpler. But none of the categories of stakeholders showed a consistent agreement on lump sum approaches. There was no real converging view there. What were now the ideas for simplification? I think we're all a little bit curious here. I was. Well, there should be less bureaucracy. That would make it simpler. A reduction in inspections and controls, but also an increased transparency to these inspections and controls were considered by respondents to be something that could make it simpler. When talking about environment under this topic, respondents indicated that maybe using more motivational payments that are linked to public goods or environmental services would make it simpler. And there is really no agreement on whether or not Pillar 1 payments make the CAP simpler or more complex. How can we modernize the CAP? Let's listen to your ideas there. Focus on sustainability in all senses of the word. Environmental, economic, and social were considered to be of importance by respondents. What we saw coming back here as well was a discussion on the pillar structure. One respondent says, keep it, the other says, throw it out. There was much debate, and I think it's a very interesting debate. Furthermore, again, the bureaucracy was flagged up as being an important part to modernize the CAP, and attention to income and maybe the support for savings in different types, precautionary savings, normal savings.
Okay, we're almost done. As I said in introduction, you'll be able to look at the answers to all the questions later today. The report will be made available online. I just want to end with a couple of concluding remarks. I want to recall first on this slide two major findings. At the beginning of the presentation, there was the question, does the CAP address the challenges? The response was to some extent only. And for the question on the is the CAP addressing environmental challenge, the answers was more negative. So the first conclusion is that there's a consensus. There was no divergence of view, there's neither between categories. There's consensus on the performance of the CAP, which gives room for improvement. In the last slides, we talk a lot about simplification. There's also a consensus there. We didn't see divergence of views between farmers and other citizens. Efforts have already started and could be continued, should be continued. The last concluding remark is that along this presentation, we've seen this tension between the economy and the environment, and how to reach these two challenges simultaneously is for us the big challenge ahead. We'd like to thank you very much for your attention. We hope you did find the results interesting, and we'd like to wish success to all the parties who will be involved in the process of modernization, with the hope that the challenge identified in this consultation will be addressed. Thank you very much. Stay here.
Well, thank you very much, Eveline and Olivier. I found your presentation hugely interesting, and I'm quite sure that I have not promised too much when I announced their presentation. I underline that and repeat what they have mentioned. The full evaluation report, which they have presented in a more compact fashion, will be available on this event's website as from 1 o'clock. It's quite a book, I can assure you, because it really goes into detail on every question, be it closed or open, and gives an extremely good analysis of what people throughout Europe think about what the CAP is and what it should become. It is clearly quite a different question how to translate all these answers into a reformed common agricultural policy. That will be the true challenge in the months and few years ahead. There is something else extremely remarkable about the presentation of Eveline and Olivier. They have not taken advantage of the full time allocated to them. And that is hugely exceptional. Normally, presenters spill over the time that they have been allocated. That is quite an achievement, but maybe also a curse for them of which they didn't know, because we now have a few minutes in which you have the opportunity to ask them questions. A few only, but if there is something burning on your mind that you have taken from their presentation, you have the opportunity to do so now, and I am sure that they will be able to give a very fast answer to you, because nobody knows the content of the answers given better than these two. Would there be any question from any one of you? Yes, please, sir.
Hello, Seamus Boland from Ireland. Simple question: in the research that you did, was there much more information in terms of how common agricultural policy sustains rural communities, particularly communities who are close to the poverty line or are involved in social exclusion? In other words, is it sustaining rural communities, do you think?
Okay. Well, we can only say what was in the public consultation. Actually, we saw some attention in the open answers to cultural landscapes and the maintenance of them. We also saw popping up that the CAP does not contribute as much to small farms, which then I would kind of interpret it as the ones that are most at risk of being very close to the poverty line. So in that sense, that popped up here and there, yes. In the open questions, not so much in the closed ones. You go ahead.
Okay, there was another. Yes, you were first.
Christian Jochum, Copa Košica. Es war mehrmals die Frage oder die Antwort nach Lebensmittelqualität, Food Quality and Diversity. Hat es da noch zusätzliche Erklärungen gegeben, was die Bürger bzw. Landwirteorganisationen darunter verstehen?
Thank you, Katrin. In terms of food quality, this was often in the open questions again. And by often is seeing it coming back systematically. It was often linked to the type of production. There was much attention to animal welfare, and many of the answers linked it to healthy diets, consumers that are aware of where their foods come from, or that should be made aware of where food come from and what labels mean. Does that answer your question?
Wonderful. Just a second. We had some questions here first, please.
Muito obrigado, Sr. Presidente. O meu nome é Jaime Pissarra.
Just a second. They have to get their headphone.
Jaime.
Oh, sorry.
Prefiro falar em português. O meu nome é Jaime Pissarra, represento a FEFAC. Tenho uma questão muito rápida. É se verificaram grandes diferenças em termos de Estados-membros dos países do Norte para os países do Sul da Europa.
Well, this was an additional level of analysis. So we had a look at differences between member states, but actually in the closed questions, there were not that many. It was not prominently present, no, not really. Maybe there is a different focus, but from the top of my head, I couldn't say. I would say no.
There was a gentleman here, and then the lady in the background. I'm sorry, I'm taking you in the order of raising hands. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. John Comer from the Irish Creamery Milk Suppliers Association in Ireland. Just something that jumped out there, improving farmers' position in the value chain. 96% of all participants felt that that was a good idea. Was there any specific way that they suggested that we could do that? Because if there was, it would be very interesting.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly add something to the comment from before. In the report that will be published, there is an entire annex that shows also the results per member state, so you can have a look there. For your question, to improve the position of farmers in the value chain, in the open questions, what came back is the short circuits and the short supply chains and the direct selling, and also to work on the other end of the value chain, the consumer end, and to create awareness there that farmers that put in sustainable practices or that put in their work just in general should receive a fair price, and that maybe, according to the participants that you see, that maybe the prices they pay can be slightly higher, or could be slightly higher. That's what we saw.
All right. For reasons of timing, 3 more questions allowed. The lady back in the background.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanka Bechevo. I work for Friends of the Earth, and I believe that the CAP should be for all, as many of other civil society organizations around the room. My question is referring to the questions in the consultations. Many of us raised in the attachments and also through to the Commission directly that the questions that they ask might be also preempting what the answers are. Did you look at actually those of us who pointed out that the questions are giving particular answers that we only can cross and not really looking at all the possible answers when we talk about the new CAP, and how did you assess this? Thank you.
So the answers to the, the papers that were attached to the surveys were analyzed by our colleagues at the European Commission, and actually Flavio will present that right after us. And they were taken into account, they were read, they were analyzed, so your views there will be considered as well, as much as I am aware of.
And for an open public consultation as well, there was 5 open questions. Sometimes it's only 1, that's according to the better regulations, so there was an effort made as well to make it possible for everybody to express his view, I think.
Thank you very much. 2 more questions. There was 1 over here and 1 over there, and the others are, unfortunately, a bit too late. Right. Go ahead.
Oui, bonjour. Donc, je m'appelle Jérôme Bartos. Je représente France Nature Environnement. Alors, tout d'abord, bravo et merci pour cette extrêmement intéressante présentation. Dans vos études, est-ce que vous avez perçu une sensibilité particulière des professionnels, des agriculteurs et fermiers sur les risques sanitaires qu'ils encourent par l'utilisation de pesticides et leur souhait justement d'avoir des mesures qui leur permettraient de les prévenir? Et symétriquement, avez-vous perçu un sens ou une sensibilité ou un sens de responsabilité sur les risques qu'on pouvait éventuellement trouver dans des produits contenant des pesticides qui sont mis sur le marché aujourd'hui? Merci.
I can answer that. So yes, there was the question related to. I need to find it. But there was a question on the environmental challenges and the CAP for tomorrow. And you remember that among the 4 challenges identified, one was the more sustainable use of pesticides and fertilizer. And actually, you will see in the report published this afternoon that there's a majority of farmers, and more farmers than other citizens, who selected that challenge for the future. So I think that answers your question.
Thank you. And one last question from the lady over there.
Thank you very much. I will switch to Slovak language because I'm a representative from Slovakia. Ďakujem veľmi pekne za dotazníkový prieskum a za informovanie o výsledkoch. Chcela by som sa však spýtať, pretože my sme na Slovensku snažili sa spropagovať tento prieskum, aby bolo získaných čo najviac odpovedí. Avšak veľakrát zo strany poľnohospodárov boli pripomienky, že dotazník je dosť náročný časovo aj z hľadiska otázok. Moja otázka je, či sa pri vyhodnocovaní brala do úvahy reprezentatívnosť. To znamená, že odpoveď 5000 poľnohospodárov z krajiny, kde ich je registrovaných 20 000, je iné zastúpenie ako odpoveď 100 000 poľnohospodárov. No, v tomto prípade nebolo také vysoké zastúpenie, ale z hľadiska toho počtu. To znamená, že sa zohľadňovala reprezentatívnosť, pretože je dôležité aj pri organizáciách, či organizácia zastupuje 10 členov, alebo či ich má 100 000. Ďakujem.
I think I addressed this question in introduction when I highlighted the difference between an open public consultation and a survey. So yes, it's self-selective, so it's not representative, but still with the high number of participants, and you've seen there's almost an equal spread between other citizens and farmers, well, this is informative, so I think this is the answer.
Brilliant.
Again, in the report this afternoon, you'll have the results for Slovakia because there's a long annex with all the detailed answers.
Brilliant. Thank you very much to both of you. And I am sure that you all appreciate that this was an exceptional situation, that you were granted the possibility to ask these 2 people questions. All other questions that may be on your mind on this subject will surely be answered from reading the full report, which contains an unbelievable wealth of information and analysis. Thank you very much. Excellent work done. Welcome now to Flavio Coturni, the head of unit of policy perspectives in DG Agri. Flavio is going to give us an overview of the contributions made for a reformed CAP in the position papers sent in during public consultation. So not the questionnaire, but position papers that we have received. Flavio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Olivier and Evelyn, for your contributions, and good morning, everybody. Now, being an DG Agri official, I have the hard task actually to be shorter than the time allocated to me in order to match the standard that Evelyn and Olivier set. So it's not going to be an easy task. Nevertheless, I'll try to be as short as possible and summarize actually another piece of the public consultation, which has been mentioned in one of the questions, which is also very important, which is the contributions actually that we received in the number of 1,400, but we will see later on that this is not the actual number, and which complements the questionnaire which has been submitted and analyzed. We had actually to set up a task force in DG Agri of 50 colleagues and staff. Actually, I would like to thank them for the hard work because, I mean, they had to move away from their core business and concentrate on these contributions, which, as I said, have been reduced to a number of 600 and 693 after some of the documents have been actually dropped because they were not relevant, or because they were simply double documents, or they were part of campaigns. So the actual number we looked at was roughly 700 contributions. And you can imagine that these contributions are very different between themselves. There are those contributions which are very articulated and sophisticated in terms of content. And so the number of pages is important, and those contributions which are really very short and to the point. This required a long work, and we gave the colleagues a protocol with a checklist, so we tried to standardize actually the inputs that these 50 colleagues gave, so that we could have a feedback which could be analyzed, and from which main messages could be extracted as much as possible. Now, if we look at the distributions of this contribution by member states, then we see actually that one member state, Germany, comes out as the most important origin of this contribution, 27%, in a way which is less actually than the replies and responses that we had in the questionnaire, but still very important. Then comes France, and then EU associations. These are mainly associations which are associations of regions in particular, and then so on and so forth. Now, if we look at the division of these contributions by organizations and individuals, we see that we have 426 contributions coming from organization and 267 from individuals. Of these, 117 from farmers and 150 from other citizens. Now, if we look at the main themes that have come out from individuals and so farmers and other citizens, then we have somehow a situation which mirrors actually the results that we've seen, which have been presented a moment ago by Olivier and Evelyn. So if we look first at farmers, some of the main issues concern the reduction of the administrative burden, addressing market challenges in terms of price and income volatility, ensuring a fair standard of living for farmers in terms of income and profitability, support for the dairy and livestock sectors. So this is clearly the result of the recent problems that these sectors have gone through in the last years, and more targeting for real and small farmers, so for active farmers and small farmers. Now, on the other side, citizens, if we looked at the more common themes that came out from these other categories, then sustainability in broad sense, meaning both economic and environmental sustainability, came out pretty strongly. Improving animal welfare, this is something which has been picked up also in the questionnaire. Consumer protections and health standards related certainly also to the question of whether or not agricultural policies should enlarge its scope to englobe and encapsulate also food policy. And organic and local production also coming out very strongly. And last but not least, the support for small and environmentally friendly farms. This is also another issue that other citizens put out very strongly. Now, if we move at the organizations, first, the first contributor to this type of work were the NGOs, platform or network. Second came the trade, business and professional association. Third, private enterprises. Then we have regional or local authorities, and 19 contributions from national entities, be it central governments or local authorities or other public national entities. Now, if we look at these the organizations, we try to divide actually and simplify the contribution that came from economic stakeholders and non-economic stakeholders. Meaning, by economic stakeholders, we meant trade and professional organizations, but also private enterprises. So we pulled them together because we saw that there were very much a common ground between those. And the most important themes were a common market and a level playing field came out very strongly in terms of a strong CAP kept at EU level. So no renationalization. That was a very clear message that came out. Income support to be kept as a key instrument. improvement of the current CAP rather than a complete change, and then protecting farmers from emerging risks like global uncertainties, climate and sanitary risks, and then the need for more research and innovation, which is linked to the debate on the modernization of the CAP. Now, if we look at the non-economic stakeholders, the need for a more environmentally and climate-friendly CAP was a common feature between the different contributions. And then we have seen two very different views. On the one hand, there were those who believe that a strong EU action at EU level should be needed. On the opposite side, some of the contributions strongly pointed out the need for more flexibility and more subsidiarity for member states. Now, the question of public money which should be devoted to public goods came out also pretty strongly. Health and nutritional objectives also is another element that non-economic stakeholders put forward, in particular the end of support for certain products which are considered to be unhealthy. And then a switch of support from the first to the second pillar was something that was highlighted by this category. Now, in terms of public authorities, here again we have two different views. There are those who believe in that more flexibility should be given to regional or national authorities, and those who believe that on the other side, a strong EU level is needed. Of course, this separation roughly corresponds actually to the separation between the contributors with the local authorities. Regional authorities more in favor of the first, which means more flexibility. Support to areas and regions and sectors in difficulty and more attention to risk management tools, also it's another element. Strong focus on simplification and reduction of administrative burden. I think that's all over the contributions, and refocus on food in all its dimension, from food supply to consumer concerns, to enlarge again the CAP to integrate elements of the food policy. Also, the improved programming is seen as an important objective, so moving away from the current structured programming into something which notably is simpler, and better targeting of support, which applies more specifically to the first pillar. Now, what are the next steps? We will have all these contributions published at this web link in the course of next week. And the outcome of the online consultation with all the other contribution activities will feed into the communication, has been said by the Commissioner this morning, on the modernization and simplification of the CAP, and on the impact assessment of the future CAP, which will eventually accompany the proposal, presumably next year. So again, as I said, it was not an easy exercise to pull together all these common elements from different contributors, because they are very different, very varied contribution, but I think that these themes, as they came out, well represent actually the categories that contributed, and you can see easily that the contributions mirror to a great extent actually the results of the public consultation of the questionnaire. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Flavio. That was hugely interesting. And if you take the two presentations together by Evelyn and Olivier on the one hand and Flavio on the other hand, I think that you have a very, very solid overview over the outcome of the public consultation and all the input we have received into it. And clearly, apart from the report on the questionnaire that will be published today as from 1 o'clock, also, as Flavio already mentioned, the analysis of the position papers will be reflected, will be published in due course on the website that you have just been identified to. Would you want to make a comment, sir?
Thank you very much. My name's Mike Clark, and I'm lead rapporteur for agriculture of the stakeholder group of the Commission's REFIT platform. The role of the REFIT platform and the stakeholder group in particular is to be the first line of response in the REFIT process to citizens and stakeholders. And in response to a submission, we recommended to the Commission that a fitness check was needed to evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of the CAP. And there were two reasons for this. The first one was we identified a need for a wider public consultation, and I would particularly like to congratulate DG Agri and, if I may, also Icarus for the very successful response and results that we've just heard. And to me, this demonstrates the relevance of CAP to a very wide range of public interests and expectations. And I think if I can just leave a little bit of a challenge for the day, the second reason we recommended this to the Commission was we identified a need for strategic review, especially given that the policy and budget cycles of CAP have been out of step. And the REFIT platform has received many proposals for simplification of the CAP. And I have to say the view of the stakeholder group is that this is very much a symptom of policy design as well as implementation. And there's clearly a need for the future of the CAP to be linked to sustainability and greater coherence with other policy sectors. And I think this ought to be a theme as we run through the day, and I'm sure it will be. There's clearly an urgency to this, both fiscal, as we've heard from the reflections paper published this week, but also environmental, such as the fitness check of the nature directives, the recent working paper on water, and indeed the debate that we've recently been hearing on pesticides. So I very much look forward to hearing where this review that has now been opened up will be proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you very much.